Good morning, friends. This is Mr. Curry, and this is Honors Global 9, and we are talking about medieval Europe for the next couple of days, and specifically about the Crusades, which is a quest for the Holy Land. We will get into more specifics about what that means in a minute. Before we do that, let's talk some business. Today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Crusades. Today, primarily through lecture. Tomorrow, a couple of documents and a video. And then on Thursday, we are going to have a quiz. As a reminder, next week we will have no class because of spring break. So enjoy that. I hope you find this interesting. We are again talking about the Crusades as the kind of capstone to our unit about medieval Europe. First thing I'd like you to do, just to get your minds moving a little bit, is to take a look at these two images. I want you to respond to these questions on Edpuzzle. What are 3 things you see in the images about the Crusades? What is something you think about the Crusades? And what is something you wonder? So I would like you to set up your notebook so that you can take some notes. Today's topic is the Crusades, so that's where you'll be taking your notes down. There will also periodically be questions on Edpuzzle, so please be prepared to answer those. Okay, so what were the Crusades? They were a long series of wars between Christians and Muslims, and they fought over control of Jerusalem, which was pretty much the Christians called the Holy Land because it was the region where Jesus had lived, preached, and died. And remember, as we talked about last week, the Catholic Church was the single most wealthy and powerful institution in medieval Europe at the time. So they had a lot of sway over people. So first, of course, we're going to look at causes, then we'll look at process, and then effects. So here is a map. This is what Europe kind of looked like during this time period. And we see that we have Roman Catholic territory a little bit over here. We have a lot of this Byzantine territory, but around this time, around the year 1100, we see the Turks, who are a Central Asian people who became Muslims, start to invade this entire area. So what happens? Well, the Muslim Turks from Central Asia start to invade the Byzantine Empire. They actually capture the Byzantine Empire, Jerusalem from the Byzantine Empire. Muslims also in this time period stopped Christians from going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Some Christians were attacked. A lot of these stories were exaggerated to get people really revved up about it. And the Byzantine Empire feared that the Muslims were going to come and invade the capital city of Constantinople. So the leader of the Byzantine Empire sent a message to the Pope asking for help. And this really brought about the Crusades. So again, we have the movement of Muslim Turks from their home in Central Asia, conquering parts of the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine Empire asks the Pope for help. And so the Pope calls on people to go on the Crusades. This is Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont, and we see this is what this image in the back is showing, the Pope telling people that actually if they go on this Holy Land, this tour of the Holy Land, this crusade to try to conquer back Jerusalem, then they will get into heaven. Okay, so everyone at this time is completely obsessed with this idea of going to heaven with salvation. Everyone thinks they're going to go to hell. So the idea that you can go on this pilgrimage, this 2-year fight probably, you could also get out of hell and you could leave your boring old day job. That's pretty exciting to people. I'd say probably a more important reason for the Crusades is that the Pope wants to consolidate his power, and he sees an opportunity to control all of the Christians in Western Christendom, which he's in charge of, by having the people fight directly for him, not for the kings. So this is one part of that struggle between Pope and the different kings. So who answered this call? Well, it was the feudal lords, and they brought their knights, and then the peasants. So some of these people were very well trained, such as the knights. Others were not trained at all, like the peasants. The First Crusade started in about 1100. It lasted for 100 years, give or take. Primarily, the Christian armies were peasants. They were untrained. They lacked any kind of military equipment. Many of them were killed by Muslims. The Knights, however, did succeed in capturing Jerusalem, so the Christians won the First Crusade. The Second Crusade, the Christians were not successful. Many of them had gone home. They decided that they had had enough. And the Muslim armies who lived there eventually decided to take back much of the territory. The King of France and the Emperor of Germany sent troops to stop the Muslims, but they were not successful. So the Second Crusade, the Christians lost. And again, this was another 100 years of fighting. Sorry about that. And then finally, we have the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade, again, the Muslims win. They defeat the Christians, primarily due to the excellent leadership of this man, Saladin, or Salah ad-Din. Saladin was the great general of the Muslim army, and he was considered extremely wise and noble ruler, and actually he gained the respect of Christians in this. The end of the Third Crusade ended with the Muslims clearly defeating the Christians. However, the Christians did get some concession because this guy, King Richard of England, Richard the Lionheart, was able to convince the Turks to allow Christians to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land again. So these crusades continue through the 1200s. So notice there are hundreds of years, a series of wars that are going on between Christians and Muslims. And it's primarily Christians leaving their homes in Europe to try to reconquer this area in Jerusalem. There were no victories for the Christians. So after the First Crusade, they were not successful. One of the kind of most terrifying footnotes here is the Children's Crusade. So actually, it wasn't approved by the Pope, but a lot of rumors went around that if kids went on this Holy Crusade, then they would go automatically to heaven, whether they died or not. So what happened is a lot of these guys went down to Germany and southern France, but they never made it to the Holy Land because when they went to southern France and to Italy to get on the boats to go to the Holy Land, the boats weren't going to the Holy Land. They were going to North Africa to sell these little kids into slavery. So that happened to about 30,000 kids. So what are some results of the Crusades? We did have improvements technologically, especially for the Europeans, because they realized that in order to catch up with the Muslims, they needed better ships and maps. They also realized that there was a lot going on in the world outside of Europe, and therefore they had to catch up a little bit. They also, it saw the end of feudalism, which we learned about last week, because the feudal lords started to die, and they spent too much money on the military. Also, people would be fighting for the king more than they were fighting for their lord. So feudalism began to decline. Muslims still ruled the Holy Land, and they still rule it for the most part today. Travel. Europeans wanted to travel more. They got to this place in Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and they realized that they had a lot of products. They had a lot of technological advantages that the Europeans did not have, and they wanted to take advantage of those. Finally, trade. This is probably the most important result. Europeans realized that there was a lot from the Indian Ocean trade that they were exposed to in Jerusalem and the Holy Land that they wanted more of. Sugar, cotton, silk, spices, all of these things. So the Europeans started to more directly become involved in global trade. Okay, so our closing reflection for today. There was a war between Christian and Muslim nations. And that's been kind of a continued theme in history up to today. So, given what you've learned today, does it seem like the causes and effects of these wars are primarily religious, or do they lie primarily with other elements of the human experience? What does this challenge show about humans, war, and our relationships with other humans?